Hello and welcome to another episode of Mike and Dave's Hi-Fi Riff. I'm Mike Evans.
And I'm David Price.
And David, on this week's riff, what are we going to be talking about?
It's an RDAT machine, Mike. Do you know what the R stands for?
Oh, don't hit me with technical questions right off the bat.
Well, you know what DAT stands for.
I can just about cope.
Even you, Mike.
I can just about... I know what NICAM stands for, so I should know
what does it stand for, then?
What NICAM?
Yeah.
Near Instantaneous Compounded Audio Multiplex.
All right, I'll let you off.
Okay, thank you. So DAT, digital audio tape. I don't know what the R stands for, though. I'm
Recordable.
Oh, is it? Is that it?
Yeah.
Oh, I thought it was going to be something snazzy.
CDR.
I could have guessed that, couldn't I? So,
well, why didn't you?
Because I thought you were going to hit me with something really technical. We've got a DAT player. Excellent.
Yeah,
Excellent.
It's a... Apologies for my colleague, sort of...
ignorance.
Taking my mind off things. This is a Sony DTC-A6. Yeah, A6, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's the one.
Yes. Probably the easiest model number to remember, and you almost forgot it. Yes.
Thank you very much.
Well, normally we have...
thank you for pointing that out.
Normally we have really difficult model numbers, and you reel them off the top of your head like there's no tomorrow. So, and this is an A6 RDAT.
Well, you just threw me with a NICAM, So I honestly didn't think, you'd have the faintest idea. So, there you go. But,
I've got a bit of a confession to make here.
Oh dear!
On my eBay searches, I've got a Sony A6 on my eBay searches, hoping one will come up at a sensible price, because I really like DAT machines, and I think this is sort of a natural evolution for. And I want to include you in this. Our love for cassette players.
Yes.
So I think this is sort of like it's still just like the coolest tool, but when DAT came out, which was in God knows what, late 80s.
Yep.
It was prohibitively expensive, wasn't it?
It certainly was for us.
Most things were.
When we put a fiver of petrol in our X19s or our TR7s, it was off the scale expensive.
And you didn't want to go over by 1 penny, did you?
No.
On the pump?
No,
because it would have bankrupt you.
So you the last sort of half pence was, you took ages for that.
You did, and you were sort of holding onto the pump, onto the bit of hose, trying to get the last drop of petrol into your tank.
It's true poverty, viewers. We have been there.
Yeah.
So, and some would say we're not that far away from it now either.
We've lived with dual CS505s.
Yes, it really has been that bad.
I loved my dual CS505. For those of you who think we're taking the mick.
Yes, and then you bought a Riga and said it was crap.
I love my Riga.
You said the dual was crap.
Yeah, comparatively speaking. But that's hi-fi all over, isn't it? Comparatively speaking.
No, that's you, comparatively speaking.
Okay. I'll concede that point.
Yeah.
But so this anyway. Back to what I was saying. This is actually on my eBay search list.
Yes.
Because I think this is a really cracking machine, and we've just had the pleasure of listening to it.
We have. Yeah.
It's a bit, once again, this is kind of one of these things, isn't it? Because it all depends on the quality of the source.
Yep.
So you've bought a DAT tape along with some really cool music. I hate to admit, some really, really cool music, recorded from a
Origin Live Voyager S turntable with an agile tone arm and a Lyra that I can't remember off the top of my head, but it was incredibly expensive.
Phenomenally expensive.
Yeah. So 30 grand vinyl high end.
We did the review on it. We did the riff on it, didn't we, recently?
Yeah.
So so your recording should sound pretty good on the back of that.
Yes.
But I just think this machine is brilliant, and it was, I think, as close as I'm going to get to having a 30 grand turntable in my living room, listening to that DAT recording.
Yes.
It was just fab. Including some of the surface noise from some of your very old recordings, which you've lent to your brother, and he hasn't treated them very well.
Knackered them.
No, but I was more polite than you.
I know.
Which actually I think adds a little bit of atmosphere. Brings me back.
Yeah.
So, but the smoothness of the recordings, it does sound like we had a turntable plugged in, didn't it?
Yeah.
It was just brilliant.
Yeah.
And I just love the format as well.
Yeah.
I think it's gorgeous, really, really gorgeous. So, what do we know about this player? What was the sort of where was it placed in Sony's lineup?
So this was a late one. If we go back to I think it was 1987, DAT as a format was launched in 1987. but it was kind of semi-stillborn, and I don't know if you remember why. So that basically, I won't put you on the spot here, but there was a legal battle about it because DAT was the first digital format that was available to consumers where you could do a direct digital copy.
Right.
So
copyright hell.
Yeah, absolutely. So as soon as the first wave, a couple of DAT machines came out, they were instantly pulled or frozen because of the rights issue, basically the artist rights issue, and the idea that and if you think that at the time they was saying that digital 16-bit 44 digital audio was perfect.
Yes.
So if you could then get a perfect digital copy of something that was perfect, then the whole music industry saw itself sort of collapsing on the spot, and there'd be no more raucous parties and cocaine-fueled nights and stuff like that with all the A&R people, because they'd have no money because everyone would have copied their sort of Steely Dan records onto DAT, and that would be the end of it.
Yes.
So the sort of second generation came out in about 88 and actually began to reach consumers in about 89, certainly in the UK, and they had something called SCMS.
Yes.
And that's an acronym you don't know. Don't say you know NICAM again, Mike. That's not going to get you off the hook this time. So, serial copyright management system.
There we are. Okay.
So you could make one digital copy of your a digital original, as it were, and then after that, if you tried to copy the copy on machines like this and all of the earlier DAT machines, it would say cannot copy or something on the display. So basically, SCMS. So this is an SCMS machine. They all were SCMS, unless you buy a Pro machine, in which case you can get non-SCMS machines. So,
wow.
But I wouldn't recommend copying music like that. So I can't possibly say that you should do that. But this is a consumer machine, and this machine itself, I think, came out round about 1996. So the format had been going for nearly 8 years, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And this is, I would say, a lot better than the earlier DAT machines that came out, and for several reasons. Firstly, the earlier machines had quite difficult tape handling. They were DAT is basically a miniaturized video cassette, if you want to be really sort of pedantic about it.
Serial access.
Yeah, it's serial access. It's really thin magnetic tape. I think it's like 3.8 millimeters or something, and you can very easily mangle the tape up. And if the machines weren't perfectly aligned and didn't have proper logic control and so on, or properly calibrated, then you could mangle your DAT tape.
Interesting.
So I'm sure you and I have mangled our DAT tapes before, but
I used to have a portable player.
Yeah.
I had a portable Sony player, and I was always blown away by it.
Yeah.
I guess one of the shortcomings with the medium was there wasn't really any sort of pre-recorded, or very little pre-recorded medium available.
Yeah.
I think we were chatting about this earlier, and I think there were one or two.
Yeah.
I think, did you say there was a New Order album and a couple of things like that?
So in the UK, Factory Records released Technique, which is 1989, as a DAT.
Okay.
That was a great album, actually. I don't know if you ever heard that, but that was an interesting one. And I think in 88, 89, Sony in Japan released Beauty, the Richie Sakamoto's album Beauty.
Yeah.
And I think they were even giving them away with new DAT machines.
Really excellent.
So there was some attempt to make it like a consumer pre-recorded music format, but it didn't work. So
I took my portable Sony DAT player to a Squeeze concert once and did a bootleg recording, and it actually sounded amazing. It sounded really, really good. It was a really great recorder.
Wow.
Really fantastic recorder. But the Sonys have a phenomenal history of making great miniature kit, haven't they? Think of the Walkie Pro, for example, one of our favourites.
Yeah. Have you got one?
But they also did an ES DAT player as well, didn't
Yeah.
they? They did a CD.
Yes.
Whoa,
So
I can't think of the model number.
they did a number of sort of full-size DAT machines in ES. So DTC-77,
That's it.
DTC-55 ES,
Yeah.
and so on. I had a few of them, and I just got mangled tapes and
Did
general
you?
misery and woe.
Did you?
They're very complex, and they seem to go out of alignment and stuff quite easily. But I think by the sort of mid-90s, they'd kind of got it to work. It's like streaming. The first sort of streamers were awful, and you couldn't get any. You'd get the sound of a modem coming through or something.
Sure.
It'd be awful. But these days, streaming generally works very well. And it was the same. They had a lot of teething troubles, I think.
It's funny, isn't it? Because when DAT first came out, I remember buying Hi-Fi Review magazine, and I can't remember who did the article. It may well have been Noel Keywood.
Yeah.
And the headline, the brazen headline on the front was "DAT wipes out CD."
Yes.
And it was sort of, it was a real attention grabber
Yeah.
on W.H. Smith's shelves.
Yeah.
And I think in many ways it probably did, but obviously one of the issues being CDs probably didn't get so mangled up in quite the same way.
Yeah.
But actually the sampling rate was better on the
Yeah.
DAT players than it was on the CDs, wasn't it?
Absolutely. So another first for DAT. Not only was it the first digital recording medium that could do a digital copy of a digital song, as it were, off CD. It was the most high resolution digital format you could buy until, it's got to be the early 90s, I think. So it was 16-bit 48 kilohertz. And you could, obviously CD is 16-bit 44.1, so you get basically a higher frequency, a wider frequency response. And to me, DAT recording at 1648 sounded substantially better than you could also, on the later models, you could choose to record at 1644. So you could choose and do comparisons. But 48 made better recordings than 44.1, I think.
Sure.
So the early DATs, you could then record in analog, as it were, at a higher digital resolution than the CDs you could buy from your local HMV or something.
No, sure. And the reason why I want one, you've almost nailed it there. The reason why I do want one, apart from being sort of super cool and trendy retro.
Well, there's another reason as well, Mike.
Go on, you do yours now.
You can't stop collecting things, and you've got like a massive amount of tat in your house. Sorry.
I can't believe
Classic.
that coming from you, of all the people in the world, to say that when you have a museum of hi-fi.
Oh, thank you for using my phrase.
Yes. So 2 reasons why I want one. One, really cool transport.
Yeah.
So actually, you could do what you've just done and have some superb quality recordings.
Yeah.
If you're fortunate enough to have a first-class source.
Yes.
And you can play them through an external DAC if you wanted to. If you had, if you had an amazing system, it can kind of fit in like a really kicking cassette player.
Yeah.
And then you can flip that ideology on its head, and you can say actually you can use it as just a DAC.
Yeah.
Because you could plug something, not a very expensive streamer into it, and actually use the DAC in the Sony, because the DACs in the Sonys are really, really lovely, aren't they? Really, really nice.
Yes, they always put very good DACs in them, absolutely.
That ting, by the way, was my thought bubble over my head.
Right, okay.
So, yes.
So, I see what you did there, Mike.
Very good, wasn't it?
He's a professional, folks. So
we're not sure what
at least
yet.
One of us.
We're still trying to find out what.
At least one of us on the sofa who's professional. Absolutely. So if you had a DAT machine in the late 80s, early 90s, as we did, then it was an amazingly liberating thing, wasn't it?
Yes, it was.
It was like if you like making mixtapes, meet the king of mixtapes.
It's the ultimate party machine, isn't it?
Yeah.
In fact, your DAT mixtape you've got in there at the moment.
Yeah.
is a pretty party tape, isn't
Yeah.
it? It's sort of, it's full of, really quite funky.
Did you just have another
It has
thought?
had another idea. They don't come very often. That's the quickest we've ever had to on Hi-Fi Riff.
Well,
So
it's good that you've made them make a sound when you have a thought now, Mike.
yes.
I've very rarely heard that.
I think you've probably only ever heard it twice, and that's in the
Has
last
that been
minute, so-
has that been all your life?
That's
when
always
you-
been switched on.
They made a ting.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. We're not talking about the Rush t-shirt.
My
either.
Hemispheres t-shirt.
So-
No. I must wear that on a riff, actually.
You should do. You've just. It's working now. It's finally coming out. After all these years, your brain has woken up, Mike. So.
I never expected it to be possible.
Me neither.
Thanks. I was talking about your nice mixtape as well. I was
Yes.
paying you a compliment with the quality of the music which you brought with you today. And this being sort of the ultimate party machine.
Yeah.
So there we are. I think that if you want to talk about the sound quality of this, it almost doesn't have one. That's going to sound stupid, isn't it? But it's because the source is so variable.
Yeah.
So obviously we've just done the recording from your Origin Live with your super flashy Lyra cartridge and all that stuff, and it sounds incredible. But obviously the opposite could be the truth. If you recorded the top 40 from an AM radio station, then it's going to sound terrible. But it's quite faithful to the original.
Yeah,
It
it's
was
very,
that
very
kind.
neutral.
Really neutral.
I mean, a good sort of decent, proper, full-sized DAT machine was capable of extremely good recordings. And so if I'll sort of put my pens in my top pocket and get my clipboard out here for a second. But if you think about a really good cassette deck, like the Nakamichi BX150 we talked about a while back, that would do 20 hertz, 20 kilohertz, with metal tape, and it would start falling down at the top of the frequency range to the point where when it's got to 20k, it's like minus 3 dB or something like that. Well, I think the specs for this is that at 20 kilohertz, this is minus 0.5,
Amazing.
dB or something like that, or less than that.
Sure.
So basically, it's almost ruler flat.
Yes.
And it also has no wow and flutter at all. And it has very high signal to noise ratio, obviously way better than cassette, I think.
You better hurry up or I'll forget what I'm going to say.
Oh, right. That was when you thought what you were going to say. Okay. So, so basically DAT, when Noel Keywood wrote about DAT Wipes Out CD in his flat response article of must be 87 or something, he was right in a way that it in terms of its technical performance, it was better. It was better than any Nakamichi, including the Dragon, etc., etc. The other side of that is that, if you're recording an analog thing and it's then going into the digital domain, the A to D converter is going to be lossy.
Of course.
So, in a sense, if you're recording let's say your Lin LP12 onto, make a recording of it, you ideally want to keep it in the analog domain.
Absolutely.
So you take it onto your Nakamichi cassette deck.
Yes.
But if you were doing a digital recording of a digital source, then ideally you want it to go to DAT because you don't have that kind of generational loss, as it were.
Sure.
But these things were really, really fancy. And the great thing about the A6 was it had super bit mapping. And this was Sony's system that I was working at Hi-Fi World when they introduced this, and they sent us loads of SBM CDs, which are now worth £1 gazillion on eBay. But basically, it's very clever. It adds dither, which is like basically digital noise, to the least significant bit of the digital signal, and it's a sort of, think of it as a kind of rudimentary digital signal processing. So sort of we're talking early 90s, 93, 94, 95, that kind of thing. And this had super bit mapping, and the late Sony DAT machines had SBM, and they really improves the sound. It makes them warmer and more kind of human sounding, more analog sounding, to use that horrible expression. So that's why if you're going to buy a DAT machine, it's worth getting this kind of thing, which was basically late period and has SBM as standard.
Excellent. And if you're going to record from CD and back again, then you really want to use the lower sampling rate. Otherwise, you've got to downsample.
Yeah. So when I'm recording, so for me, I've got a CD recorder as well. So if I'm doing like if I'm doing a mixtape or something that I want to spin off onto CD, then I'll just record on DAT at 1644. Then it doesn't have to. Then the CD recorder doesn't have to transcode it, downsample it to 44, because that's a lossy process. So basically you can decide how you want to use it. But in these days of 2496 and 24192 and all that stuff, 16-bit 48 or whatever sounds really pathetic, but still, it's surprisingly how good it is.
Yes,
and to me, it sort of gives the lie that there is a massive difference with super high sampling frequencies. I mean,
sure.
I think there is definitely an improvement, but it's often overstated.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. But it's got a bit of everything. You've got 2 digital inputs and 2 digital outputs, coaxial and optical.
Do you want to show the?
Let's have a look at it. Let's turn it the right way around.
Yep.
Yeah. There we are. There we go. How about that? So so two different types of input and output. Perfect. So future proof. So you can use it as transport or a DAC.
Yep.
So it's 2 things in one.
Yep.
Really, and it does both of them brilliantly.
Yeah.
So look, let's do it. Let's do a riffometer, a retro riffometer. What are you going to give your own A6 super bit mapping high density linear converter?
Say that again, Mike.
Exactly. What are you going to give the Sony?
Well, I think so. I think I'll give it a 9 because it's a later model. It's not as robustly built. The earlier models were like some of the top ones had like copper chassis and millions of power supplies, and they weighed a ton.
Yeah.
And this is a bit flimsier, but basically the mechanism is better. It's a modern mechanism. It's got super bit mapping. It's got one of the last and very good kind of 1-bit pulse DACs in it, and so on. A good A to D as well. So if you're going to go for a DAT machine, and I doubt many people are, but I know you are, Mike. So I would go for something of this generation, and Sony did some great stuff, and the A6 is a really good one. It's quite popular in pro audio applications as well. I got this from a musician who transferred to hard disk recording or something.
Excellent.
Yeah,
I'm going to give it a 1.
Right. Controversial.
Yeah, I'm going to give it a 1 because I don't want anyone bidding on them on eBay and pushing the price up until I bought one. But when I bought one, I'm going to give it a 9 as well.
Okay.
So there we are.
So on that bombshell, an average of 5 for this piece of utter rubbish.
But going up shortly.
Yes, but when Mike's got one, it goes up to an average of about 9, doesn't it?
Yeah, it certainly does. Good maths there.
Yes, I know. Excellent. Well, there you go.
9 plus 9 gives an average of 9. Nothing gets past you.
I know. Yeah.
And on that note, thank you so much for watching this episode of Mike and Dave's Hi-Fi Riff. It's been a pleasure. We'll see you at the next one. Bye-bye. Bye.
Bye.